Hello. Yep. Okay. All right. Well, good morning. Welcome if you're tuning in live. If not, welcome to my page. It's Zane Truscott here. And today I'm wanting to talk about chronic fatigue syndrome. And this is a topic that's quite near and dear to my heart because as a 17-year-old, it was something I had a really chronic bout of. And it got me to a point where I had to clean up a lot of things that were going on in my life, both emotionally and in terms of my diet and lifestyle as well. And, here I am, I'm 48 in a couple of weeks. So, 30 years later, and, I can say that what I discovered when I was 17 and what I've been able to put into practice throughout my life the past 30 years has really helped me to stay on track. And I've never looked back. I've never suffered from chronic fatigue since then. But in the work that I've been on the front line helping to facilitate over the last 15 years or so with Don Tolman, also his son Tyler, and other experts in the field of wellness, I've come to realise that chronic fatigue is a very, very real problem. And, we hear about these statistics. If you get online, you'll find that it's something that predominantly affects people in their 40s and 50s, mostly women. In fact, women are 4 times more likely to suffer from chronic fatigue than men. And, it kind of begs the question, why is it? Now, obviously, we have a lot of hormonal changes, we have metabolic changes as our life goes on, as we get older. And my wife Inga is the first to share with people when she talks about the amazing benefits of essential oils and how they impact the emotions and health and healing for everyday use. But she often shares her story about how she suffered from early menopause. We had 3 children before the age of 30, and it was in her early to mid 30s that she had this early onset menopause, and it threw her into a bit of a spin, and she sort of had to work through some issues in that regard. But I've found that a lot of the problems that people face when it comes to chronic fatigue are not just physical, and I'm going to share some tips with you today as to how you can fix things dietarily and also in terms of your lifestyle if you're suffering from fatigue of any kind, but specifically chronic fatigue. But I think just as importantly is the emotional and the mental aspect, because it's not kind of spoken about much. And certainly if you go to a doctor and you have chronic fatigue symptoms, then chances are they're going to prescribe you with some kind of thyroid medication like thyroxine or potentially antidepressants or some other form of invasive medication that can suppress the symptoms temporarily, but in the long term, it's really just putting a band-aid over a bigger problem. And so it's important that we look into the emotional and the mental aspect whenever we're looking at a health condition, because too often what happens is that people, if they go to a doctor, they end up with a label, and the label is not them. If you go to a doctor, and they prescribe you with insulin because you've been diagnosed as being a diabetic, very easily that label can infiltrate your state of mind and your psyche. And over the course of time, whenever you're introduced to people or you're around your family, you're always sort of introduced as somebody, who's diabetic, and that becomes part of your makeup or identity. When the reality is it's not your identity at all. It's just simply a label that's been given to you by some so-called expert who believes they have the right to give you that label. And I've got a big problem with that, and the reason I do is because I've seen for so long, particularly in our workshops that I've been frontlining with Don over the years. I've seen the impact that emotional crisis and that identity and going back to the medical system time and time and time again can have on people's psychological state of mind and the behaviours that they take. And so it's really important that we become very conscious of that side of things and that we do our best to kind of disrupt and break that cycle. So if you go to a doctor and you've got chronic fatigue symptoms, the clinical name for chronic fatigue syndrome is a condition known as myalgic encephalomyelitis. It's quite a long word, but it's kind of a fancy name for what we know as chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, typically they'll give you a blood test. As I said, 9 times out of 10 you'll end up on thyroid medication or antidepressants of some kind. You would go to a doctor or be alarmed by the fact that you have these chronic symptoms of fatigue if you are, incessantly feeling tired all the time. You just can't seem to get out of your own way. Your sleep patterns are constantly disrupted. You're suffering from memory loss, headaches, mental fog. You can't concentrate. You carry weight easily is a big one. You have food addictions that you find it really difficult to let go of. And you just have generally a susceptibility to a lack of physical and mental and emotional strength, and you feel like your immune system is kind of compromised, and perhaps you're always battling with being well. And that's not a fun place to be, and I know that because I was there when I was 16, 17 years old, and I didn't know what caused it. And I did go to the doctor, and my mum, bless her heart, she did all that she could to help me through it. I had chronic skin conditions, and I was bedridden for about a month. And I knew something wasn't right. And obviously, as a teenager, you are going through all sorts of hormonal changes as well. But for me, there was a much deeper desire or reason for me to question what was going on within my own body. And so I made a pact to myself that I wasn't going to live this way. I was going to be somebody who really embraced wellness and put myself in the best possible state of mind and also physically, so that I could get through no matter what life threw my way. So the breaking point for me was that 4 weeks in bed where I couldn't do anything, and I was always sweating, and I just couldn't function. And I came across a book called Fit for Life by a couple by the name of Harvey and Marilyn Diamond, and you can look it up online. But essentially, the Fit for Life diet was all about following the body cycles, and it was essentially about fasting until midday. And it was all about the power of plant foods. It was all about hygienic eating, an ancient Greek principle called orthopathy. But essentially, it boiled down to the fact that allowing your body to do its handy temple work, its digestive work during the elimination cycle, and supporting that process through high water content foods and foods that are designed by Mother Nature to help us hydrate and detoxify. And of course, those foods, believe it or not, are fruits. And I know there's a lot of conjecture out there around sugar, fruit, and whether sugar in fruit is the same as sugar off the shelf, or there's a lot of debate around that. But I'm going to touch on that a little later in this chat. But the reality is that message made an awful lot of sense to me, and it was the thing that I credit my healing to. And I've pretty much followed that principle, not every single day, but it's something I always go back to if I'm feeling a little run down, or I'm feeling like a little bit behind the eight ball with my health and vitality. I always go back to the Fit for Life general ethos and general principles of living. So, but I'm not here to talk about that specific modality here today. I'm more here to talk about the problem of chronic fatigue. What are the signs that we have it, and what are some simple things that we can do to A, avoid it, and B, to help heal ourselves if we have it. So that's what I want to get on to today. I've got a few notes here that are going to help me along the way, but just before I get into the physical aspect, I just want to touch on a little broader the mental and emotional side. And I've got this little symbolic word called PAFO, which basically means past is P, addictions is A, failures and fears is F, and O is opinions. And if we really look at our habits and the behaviours that we're performing on a daily basis, oftentimes, if you really stop and think consciously about those habits, you'll find that they are a result of one of those four things: either our past, our upbringing and what we believe to be true in terms of how we should manage our health. It can also come down to addiction. So somewhere along the line, we've had a time where we've ended up down a path, and then that path is compounded over the course of time and distance, and we don't know how to rescue ourselves back. It could be an addiction to fast food. It could be an addiction to some form of sugar or alcohol, or even some kind of drug of some kind, or medication. So addictions are a big problem. The other issue, of course, is how we address and how we frame our past failures. And we've all had past failures, and we all experience fears as well. And we all know that the acronym for fear is, of course, false evidence appearing real. So it doesn't even really exist. It's just something that subconsciously shows up when we get ourselves into a state of stress or overwhelm because we're focused on a particular outcome that perhaps is not even the reality of what the outcome will be. So how it is that we frame and put perspective into our fears and failures is very, very important as well. And then, of course, opinions. And, no more in no other area do we have, this huge influx of opinion than we do in the area of health. And, you can go online and you can look up, different diets and tap into different experts. And one guy will say, heal diabetes this way. And another guy will say, no, that's totally wrong. Do it this way. And so, it can be very, very overwhelming and confusing and quite complex for the average person to know what to do. And chronic fatigue is the same. There's all sorts of different aspects and opinions out there as to how you go about healing that. Of course, a doctor's going to tell you one thing. And of course, because they've been raised in the medical system to prescribe essentially cut, burn and poison, that's the only thing that they're going to give you. And so you've got to ask yourself, will you want to be a part of that system, or whether there's a more common sense approach that we know as self-care, where you can start to take real ownership and responsibility for your own health and well-being. And I choose self-care. That's what I choose. And that's why I haven't been to a doctor in 30 years. I refuse to go to one unless it's a crisis or trauma situation, because I really understand the inherent and the innate power of the human body to get itself from a state of chaos into a state of homeostasis. And that's what it's naturally designed to do. Our cells want to be healthy, they want to be happy. Our body wants to be healthy and happy. And so if we're feeling some kind of a symptom or imbalance or chaos going on, it's typically a sign that something's out of whack. And so that's the time where we don't need to suppress that symptom with a Band-Aid solution. It's the time for us to just take a step back, take a breath, center ourselves, start to think about what it is that's going on in our body, get intuitively in touch with ourselves, and then start to make some, basic lifestyle and dietary and, emotional changes that we need to make that are going to help us get back on the path. And so that's essentially what self-care is about. So before I get into the tips, let's just summarize there. So what we think, what we feed into our mind, our belief systems impact our emotions, how we feel. And then those feelings and those emotions have a massive impact on the daily behaviors and habits that we gravitate to. And so and then of course that leads, to the outcomes that we have for our life. So if we're experiencing pain or we're experiencing fatigue right now, if you would just stop for a moment and assess where you're at and scan back into your thought process, your emotional state, and the impact that, that is having on your behaviors and your daily habits, you'll probably find that you have the answer as to why you're suffering from this kind of situation, in this case, chronic fatigue. So, what causes chronic fatigue? What causes it? There's three main causes. Number one, stress, emotional stress, physical stress, trauma, feeling like we're not enough, buying into too much social media, listening to too many experts, overwhelm, information overload. And we can only cope with so much on a daily basis. And that's why we have to be so acutely dialed in to what I call our radio frequency. Our radio frequency, who we're tuning into on a daily basis, what we're feeding our mind, our environment, who we're listening to. Because there's so much information out there, there's not a shortage of strategy, there's simply a shortage of psychology and emotional fitness. And so you and I have to be really acutely dialed into what we're doing, why we're doing it, where we're getting our source of information, and ultimately trusting our gut. We seem to have lost that as a sixth sense. That ability to just trust intuitively what's inside our heart and our gut. And yet that's just so important, because usually our gut is correct. And we all know, situations, crises in our life where we've had to make a decision, a head or a heart decision. Typically, if you follow your heart, you'll make the right decision. It's the same thing when it comes to your health. So stress, that's number one. Number two is a poor diet. It's a pretty obvious one, but we're going to unpack that a little bit here as well. The third one is a lack of movement. And, it seems so simple and probably a little counterintuitive as well when it comes to fatigue, because I know when I was fatigued and I was bedridden for 4 weeks, the last thing on earth I felt like I could do was get up and actually move. But I knew that intuitively that the longer I stayed in bed, the more that whole, fatigue situation was perpetuating and feeding on itself. And I absolutely knew that at some point I'd need to just get up and start to move. We all know that energy creates energy. Our body feeds off high vibration. It feeds off movement. Life is movement. We are meant to move. And, if you go back through history and you look at what our ancestors did, be it the caveman age or back into the ancient Egyptian era and the Greeks, and you look what humanity has been through and the cycles and our ability to deal with famine and to be hunter-gatherers and to go for periods of time through crisis and wars and be without food. And, we are capable of so much more than today's world, lets us know that we are. And so, our job is to just be really in touch with ourselves and our true inner power. And I think that's just so important when you're dealing with any condition, not just, fatigue, but it could be anything that's either a niggling ailment or it could be a chronic condition. And that's why getting our house in order and our mindset right is so important. So stress, diet, and exercise. So if we were to unpack the diet point, then basically it all begins with processed foods. And what I'm going to run through here is just a list of kind of food categories, if you like, that have a big impact on what leads to toxicity in our body, which is the most significant detrimental aspect when it comes to our long-term health. I've got this little equation that I like to talk about, and it's basically toxicity multiplied by frequency equals chaos. And everything that's going on inside your body right now, it's either in a state of homeostasis and balance, or it's in a state of chaos. And if you're feeling unwell, or you're feeling lacking energy, or you're feeling, like there's something going on that's not quite right, it's typically because you've got some kind of a chaos going on inside your body, or there's a deficiency, a chronic deficiency of some kind going on. And so the source of toxicity and deficiency usually boils down to one word, and that is plaque. And plaque is a substance that basically lines cells of the body, it lines our stomach, it lines our intestines, and it's something that, we can go years not knowing is accumulating in our body, and years not doing anything about it and feel totally fine. And then one day we wake up and we realize, well, hey, it's time to clean house. The body's, it's objecting, I'm starting to feel pain, I've got a lump, there's something going on that's not quite right. And that is a sign of typically chaos and some kind of, born out of some kind of toxicity or deficiency going on inside the body. So most of the time, this all starts with what we put into our body. And so our diet is absolutely critical, as I know that you know. But processed foods and allergens, over 80% of the foods that you find on your supermarket shelf fall into this category. And they're laced with preservatives, they're laced with artificial sweeteners, food colorings, chemicals like MSG that encourage people who consume those foods to come back for more and more, or they're highly addictive. Some of these sweeteners are neurotoxins, which can lead to, amputations, necrosis, blindness. We all know about diabetes as well. So it's so important that we go to the supermarket that we, just become very acutely versed at very quickly looking at an item and seeing whether that is, potentially toxic to us or not. And, I've got a little golden rule of thumb. I do most of the shopping. Sorry, Nala, Inga. I didn't want to put you in it, but I do most of the shopping for our household, and I just enjoy going to the supermarket and shopping for good produce, or the farmer's market, or whatever. It's something I love to do. But I've got this little 2-second rule, and if I'm doubtful about a particular item that is packaged, I'll just pick it up and have a quick look. And if there's one ingredient that I can't recognize, or one ingredient that I can't pronounce, I don't buy it. When it comes to things like tomato sauces and soy sauce and, curry mixes and all of those kinds of things. And you can make all that stuff at home yourself from beautiful, fresh produce, herbs, spices, you name it, on your own, if you've got that conscious mindset towards it. So it's important that we avoid things like canned foods, bottled sauces, processed meats, which is a big one, particularly things like salami, sausages, bacon. So if you're not, you haven't quite taken the plunge and you're not vegetarian yet, and you are still eating animal products and or meat, at the very least, make sure that you're going for, ethically raised, hormone-free, grass-fed, butter, organic, those kinds of things whenever you possibly can, and avoid at all costs all chemical and processed meats, salami, bacon, ham, corned beef, those kinds of things. And also, a big one is hydrogenated oils. There are fats in nature that are extremely healthy for the cells, and they energize us and they nourish us, and our body thrives and needs those things to protect the myelin sheaths and the nerves, and they have a very important function. But then there are fats that once they're chemically altered, they become toxic in the body, and hydrogenated oils turn into trans fats, and they fall into this category. So you've got to be really mindful of certain oils out there that are being processed, and really to avoid them. It's always best to just go with cold pressed extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, which is great for high heat. It's got a really high heat point. So if you're baking potatoes or chips or something at home, wherever you can, use coconut oil, extra virgin olive oil in your salads. Things like macadamia oil, avocado oil are really great as well, flaxseed oil, and just avoid those more chemically processed. Even grass-fed organic butter is better than hydrogenated oils like margarine and canola oil and those kinds of things. So that's a big one. Obviously, some people have intolerances, and this can lead to chronic fatigue. So gluten and dairy are typically the big culprits. Gluten, Don shares the story about gluten and how there was never any such thing as a gluten intolerance until such time that they started storing grains for long periods of time in chemicals, and particularly aluminium type derived chemicals. And what happens is that these impact the mucosal lining of the intestines over time. And so it's so important that when we're eating things like rice and wheat, that we're going always with whole grain varieties, and that we're not just choosing a regular pasta off the shelf or regular bread. Make sure it's stone ground, organic, it's pesticide free. So basically my point is just know your source when it comes to grains, and you'll find it take some time because you've got to reset the gut to clear out the offence that is causing you a problem. But once you've done that, and if you start with whole grain varieties of grains, you'll find that gluten tolerance won't be an issue for you moving forward. And we've seen that many, many times over the years from people who've suffered from that kind of condition. The other one, of course, is dairy. Now, dairy in its own right, in a raw form, is actually quite a healthy food, particularly because of the ferments that help to reset the gut and put good bacteria into the gut. So things like raw organic yogurt, raw milk, which I think they label bath milk these days because you can't legally sell raw milk as a consumable item. They have to call it bath milk, but you can find that in good health food stores. Things like kefir, raw organic cheeses, those kinds of things are very, very beneficial because they help, as I say, build the good bacteria in the gut. And quite often, if we are experiencing fatigue, a lot of it has to do with an imbalanced ecology within our gut. So we need to pay really close attention to the foods that we're eating that are going to help us to reset that and bring good bacteria back into the digestive tract. So if you're going to eat dairy, personally, the only dairy food I eat these days is butter, raw butter. Gave up milk a long time ago, and occasionally some yogurt as well. But even yogurts these days, there are so many wonderful other varieties, particularly with coconut, that you can access that have all of the probiotics and good bacteria there as well. So dairy is a big one. Avoid homogenized and pasteurized dairy is really my point. Okay, so 80% of the products you see in the dairy section, you want to turn a blind eye to that and just focus on the organic stuff that you can find. Refined sugars and grains. This kind of ties back into the whole gluten thing, but any grain that has been altered from its original state, and one of the biggest commodity crops out there is corn, and you'll find it in most sort of big brand breakfast cereals. You want to avoid that. Okay, so the wheat they use in most supermarket shelf bread, I wouldn't put that in my body. That's the reason why you have a gluten intolerance to start with, and it's certainly not going to help the situation when it comes to chronic fatigue. So always go with whole grain varieties when it comes to things like rice, things like pasta, grains like quinoa. You should be adding into your diet as well. Buckwheat, burgle, those kinds of things. The next problem is, so we've covered processed foods, we've covered refined sugars and grains. The next thing is, of course, overeating. Now, we've kind of been raised with the notion that if we're feeling a lack of energy or feeling fatigued, that we actually need to eat more to get our energy up. But what we know is that we actually don't need anywhere near the calories that we think we do on a daily basis. And so when it comes to diet, just realize that if your cells are nourished, then you're going to find that you can eat a lot less than if you're malnourished. And so, the message from the brain to the stomach, if you're unnourished and if your cells are not thriving and they're not getting the nutrition they need because there's plaque and there's blockages and toxicity in the system, the message is always going to be feed me more food because it's always starved for nutrients. And so, the secret is not to eat more, but the secret is to allow your body to reset. And that's where fasting or cleansing comes in, which I'm going to get to in a moment. But allow your body to reset, clear out the effects, clear out the toxicity, clear out the plaque. And then once you reset, well, then you can move over and start eating smaller amounts and kind of build back up to your normal amount of calories that you would eat. But what you will find is that you need to eat, or you have a desire to eat a lot less. I know that I can pretty much operate on 1.5 meals a day, and it doesn't impact my energy. I'm always focused. My digestive system works like a treat. Like everything just works perfectly for me because I don't overeat. And I said, I enjoy a good meal, and I enjoy, dinner's my main meal of the day, and I look forward to that. But I find that I'm full a lot quicker than I otherwise would be. At times where I'm feeling a little sluggish or down because my cells are working at their optimum. So overeating, chronic dehydration, we have to realise that thirst or hunger is typically a mask for thirst. So, our first port of call when we feel hungry should always be to drink water. That should be step number one. When we're hydrated, we feel less hungry. Most people are not suffering from a lack of hunger. They're suffering from a lack of chronic dehydration. And this ties very much into the symptoms of fatigue. You should be drinking, your body is about 70% water, the brain is about somewhere upwards around 90% water. We should be drinking at least the weight of the brain every 24 hours, which is about 2 litres. And the brain always gets first call or first dubs on the water that comes into the stomach. And through the frontal lobes of the brain, it sucks it up to nourish the brain through a process called capillary precipitation. And then when it enters the brain, it converts into a liquid called hydronium fluids. And that's what helps our brain to flush out toxins, to stay alert, and, to be nourished. And so if we're not replacing that 2 litres of fluid into our body every single day, when I say fluid, I'm not talking about pure water, then we're going to start to feel mental fog. And a lot of the symptoms of chronic fatigue are going to start to show up. Headaches, insomnia, fatigue, lethargy. A lot of it's got to do with what's going on inside the brain. So make sure at least 2 litres of water per day. Optimally, particularly if you're active, particularly in summer, we tend to perspire and sweat a bit. If you're active, you're exercising, or you've got a job where you are sweating quite a lot, quite a labour-intensive job, it's absolutely critical that you move more towards 1 litre per 22 kilos of body weight. So for someone like me, 75 kilos, been that way for 30 years, I'm 3.5 litres of water per day. And what time is it now? It's 9:35. I'm already up to my 2nd litre of water now. I've been up since 5 o'clock. So make water absolutely number one, an absolute priority, and you'll find if you're feeling symptoms of fatigue, they're going to very, very quickly start to subside, particularly when you do some of the other things that I mentioned here. So get rid of processed foods and toxic chemical product foods. Get rid of refined sugars and grains. Eliminate those completely. Anything white, you want to totally out of your diet. So white flour, white rice, white pasta, white bread, all those have to be put to the side. If you're suffering from fatigue, not to say that you can't have them every once in a while. If you go to your favourite restaurant and they've only got the regular pasta, of course, but what I'm talking about here is a lifestyle that if you're suffering from some stuff or you need to up level your health. And I'm talking about 80-20 rule, guys. That's what we need to work towards. Chronic dehydration, overeating, stress, we've covered that. The other big one is stagnant air. So as human beings, we're on the hunt 24 hours a day for electrified moving air. And a lot of the symptoms of fatigue come in because we're lacking oxygen. We're lacking clean oxygen because we're lacking clean air. And so you can't see it. When I built this little office, I made the builder put a window in behind me because it's really important to me throughout the day when I'm working that I've got a bit of space to create some fresh air. And it's so important that when we sleep, we've got the windows open a little bit, we've got a ceiling fan going. Our fans at home, they never ever stop. They're just on the lowest level and they're just going all the time. And all that's doing is just electrifying the air and keeping the air moving. And what we find is we never have any kind of respiratory problems. And I don't care what time of year it is, even when the flu season comes around or there's bugs in the air, everyone else is sick, we're not, because we're always, oxygenating our respiratory system and our cells through good, clean, moving air. So it's so important that we make sure that we're exposing ourselves to that air. When you exercise, it's important that you walk outside. Obviously, training inside is fine, but just make sure you're also getting outside and you're getting that clean moving air into the body as well. Irregular schedule is a big problem. Constipation is a symptom of what as well. If you're constipated, that's a sign typically that you're dehydrated, that there's plaque and toxicity in the body that you're struggling to eliminate. So we'll get into some solutions for that right here now. And of course, I mentioned the lack of exercise. So guys, I'm going to spend about 5-10 more minutes just giving you some solutions, and then that will be a wrap for today. But number one is to do a colon cleanse. Now, we put together a colon cleanse product called Cleanse Me, which is available at the tolmanselfcare.com store. And essentially, it's bentonite clay, it's psyllium husk, it's ground flax, and it is a little bit of dried ginger, cinnamon, and apple just to make it a little bit more palatable. And it comes in 2 parts, and the clay is 1 part, and then the flax is the other part. And you alternate every hour for about 8 hours, and you can do that anywhere from 1 day up to 4 days, depending on what you've got going on within your body, and that'll help to strip the mucosal lining out of the intestine and to help remove any metallic waste or metabolic waste that's sitting in the gut that needs to come out, that's causing fatigue and any kind of ailment or offense. So it's always recommended if you're going to do a fast, and particularly if you're not in great health and you're suffering from some kind of condition, that you begin with a colon cleanse. And this is a big one when it comes to fatigue. For the reasons I just mentioned, toxicity and deficiency are typically going to be the root causes of that chronic fatigue. And so you want to address that by doing a colon cleanse to start with. So the bentonite clay, just so you know, actually acts like a sponge, and it has a negative charge that attracts the positively charged toxic particles that are going on inside the gut, inside the digestive tract, and it basically draws those in so that they can then be eliminated. And the flax acts like a brush, and it basically cleans the colonic wall and gets it out of the body. So that's how the colon cleanse protocol actually works. From there, you're then in a state, your body's in a state where to go and do a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 day juice cleanse, your cells are going to be ready to receive that nutrition because you've basically cleaned the gut. Your body and cells are ready and clear and able to receive nutrition. Sometimes when people go and try and do a fast, when they're just backed up with plaque and toxins, it can be difficult to get results from that because they haven't got to problem number one, which is to help clear out some of the offence and toxicity that's already in the system. So I always recommend, if you're in great health, fine, you can go straight in and do a juice fast for multiple days, and you'll find that you'll reset your system, you'll feel great, you'll feel re-energized, you'll lose some weight, you're going to get your mind back together as well. But if you are suffering a little bit from ailments or overweightness or sluggishness or fatigue, start with a colon cleanse. Walk for 30 to 45 minutes per day, no matter what. Get outside and do it. Walking is the most foundational exercise as human beings that we're meant to do. So unless you're physically disabled from walking, I don't want to hear any excuses. Get outside and walk. And no matter what other type of exercise you're doing, and I think it's awesome if you're doing yoga or cycling or swimming, or, there's a whole plethora of other activities you can also do if you want to level up your exercise, but make walking absolutely number one. For me, I always walk after my workout. So I'm doing, 45-minute to an hour walk after my morning workout. Ingrid and I typically walk our dogs during that time. So essentially I'm getting the best part of 2 hours of exercise in every single morning. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm just saying that if all you've got time for is one form of exercise, then make it walking, because it's a constitution. It's what our body needs to, build strong foundations. It helps the peristaltic action of the intestines to get activated, particularly in the morning, which helps us to eliminate waste, get the digestive system going. There's so many benefits I can go on, but I know you're smart enough to know that you need to walk every single day. Now, if you want to do two forms of exercise and you don't have time to do all that in the morning, either get up earlier or do the exercise that you want to do. It could be yoga, it could be Pilates, cycling, whatever it might be, and then come back after work and do your walk in the evening. You can do that as well, or vice versa. The fifth point is to boost your salt intake. Now, salt, a lot of people don't realize, is the electrolyte of all 10,000 trillion cells, or however many cells we have in the body. There's some debate around that, but there's trillions and trillions of cells in the body, and they thrive on salt. Now, when we talk about salt, we're not talking about table salt you find on your supermarket shelf, your regular table salt, which has compounds in it like aluminium, which helps it to not cake. But that's a toxic substance. So always go for either a Himalayan or a Celtic sea salt, or some form of rock salt that's nature made, that hasn't had any work done to it, it hasn't been refined, it's not chemically tweaked, and make that part of your diet as well daily. I always like to add a little bit of sea salt to my lemon water in the morning. Also helps to kickstart, the digestive process as well. Electrifies the cells before exercise, and away I go. So there's all sorts of little hacks that perhaps in another video I can get into and share with you. But so add salt and just more whole foods. So just start looking at food from nature's table through a completely different set of eyes. It has all of the colors of the rainbow. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why whole foods resemble parts of the human anatomy. If you slice an apple like Don's been teaching for 50 years, and you cut it across, you see a perfect five-pointed star. We stand in the shape of a five-pointed star. Blueberries have a little five-pointed star on the base. Strawberries look like the heart. Tomatoes look like the heart. Pure heart food. So, this whole thing of doctrine of signatures, there's a reason for it. Not many gurus even today are talking about this stuff. And I think it was back in the 1800s that it was first put out there by a guy by the name of Bohm. And then more recently, Don Tolman and his son Tyler, and yet it's such a brilliant wisdom that people have just lost. And they're scared of particularly fruit and to some extent vegetables as well. And yet those are the things that we need. Fruit enlivens us, and vegetables establish us. They strengthen us. And that's why in summer, more and more of the fruits come in season, and they come more higher water content, and we kind of gravitate and become more attracted to them, the mangoes and the melons and all that kind of thing. And so we need to trust that intuitive, sense of of attraction to those foods and make sure we embrace them, because that's what our cells are craving. So more whole foods, go to your local farmers markets, always embrace foods that are grown in the temperate zone in which you live, because they're the ones that share the same oscillating frequency that your cells are experiencing and are getting nourished from the environment around you. And that also is a nature wisdom that Don teaches as well. So try to avoid supermarket produce as much as possible. I mean, I'm even guilty at times of getting the odd item from the supermarket, but I just find when I go to local farmers markets on a Saturday or a Sunday morning, and you get to speak to the growers and you get to buy spray-free and organic, whenever you can as well. It's just chalk and cheese compared to what you get from the supermarket. The final point I'll make is just to reinforce fermented foods. And I touched on it earlier, but it's so important that we understand the part that the ecology of our gut, our microbiome plays in terms of our energy and in terms of whether experiencing symptoms of fatigue. And a lot of people, certainly if you go to a doctor, they're not going to talk about it, and they're just going to give you, the medication or whatever, and you're just going to be trapped in this vicious cycle of having to use that medication pretty much for the rest of your life. Whereas if you take a step back and you realise that what Hippocrates taught, all those centuries ago, which was that all disease begins in the gut, we start to pay attention to the very centerpiece of our health, which is our gut ecology. And so the way you reestablish the gut and you ensure that the gut is functioning at its best and building the right immunity and resistance to different things is that you make sure that you're getting plenty of probiotics in your diet. Now, where do probiotics come from? Well, of course, they come from typically fermented foods. Now, I know that you can get probiotic supplements. Some of them are okay, but what I'm talking about is probiotics that you get from food. And so it's so important to include in your diet, even 3 or 4 times a week. Doesn't necessarily have to be every single day, but to ensure that you're getting probiotic-rich foods into your diet every single day. And what that's going to do is going to cultivate good bacteria, and there are literally millions and millions and millions, if not billions, of colonies of bacteria in the gut, and some are good and some are bad. And what you've got to make sure of is that the good guys are always outweighing or keeping at bay the bad guys. And if you keep feeding the bad guys with processed foods and chemical additives and crappy diet, then what's going to happen is that the bad guys are going to overtake the good guys, and then from that's where you're going to start to feel fatigue and sickness start to set in. So the very root cause of everything is our gut. And so important to pay attention to our gut health and what we're putting into our body that's cultivating good bacteria. Some of the foods you might want to include in your weekly diet include, as I said before, good organic dairy, kefir, olives, sauerkraut, love sauerkraut. And right now, there's this guy that makes sauerkraut down at the markets. It's unbelievable. I can't even really describe it. I'll try and bring it in for one live stream and show you. But sauerkraut's magnificent. So many varieties out there. Go to a good health food store and you'll find a variety that you can really embrace. Pickles, kimchi, tempeh, miso, and even kombucha, that fermented drink as well. And you know what? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say even a good preservative-free, biodynamic or organic wine or beer. I drink Stone and Wood. It's my favourite beer. It's no additive, no preservative. You know what? Yes, it's beer, but I tell you what, it's a good one. And if you're going to drink alcohol, just try to avoid anything that's got preservatives in it whenever you can, because they're not good for the health of the gut. But these drinks are sacraments. They are naturally brewed, naturally fermented drinks. And so just have glass of wine or a beer with a meal, or, even if it's only 2-3 times a week, whatever it is. And obviously I'm saying in moderation, but just make sure that, you don't totally say, hey, no, I can't drink at all, because that's not true. Just be really cautious of what it is that you are drinking. And what's good, you can have a good time, particularly if you're doing all the other things right as well. So, guys, I'm going to wrap. I wanted to talk about sugar, man-made versus plant-made, but I'm going to leave it there for today, and perhaps I can do that in another video, because I didn't intend to kind of go for 45 minutes, but I really hope that I've been able to just give you some tips and insights that you'll find helpful, even if you're not suffering from any type of chronic fatigue yourself. I know that you will know somebody who is. It might be someone close to you or somebody a little distant, but so if you got value out of today's video, I'd love it if you'd share it with somebody who can make a difference for. I'd also love it if you'd like my videos. This is something I've just started doing the last couple of weeks, and I've learned a lot over the years, both personally and professionally, in this health and wellness space. And there's one thing I know for sure, and that is that the healthcare system is not giving us the answers to health. It's just not. The answers to health come down to our intuitive sense, our self-care, the extent to which we take responsibility for our health, the extent to which we seek the truth. And so I just implore you to just, live at a high vibration, seek the truth, be conscious, make good choices. And above all, my message to you is to just keep health simple, because it really is. And the more that we build strong foundations and we do little things right on a daily basis, and we stop buying into all of the propaganda and complexity and gurus around health, the more we'll start to feel a sense of certainty and confidence around health. And that's really what I'm here to help you do. So anyway, hope you enjoyed today's live stream, and I'll be back, same bat time, same bat channel, next Friday. If you're on my Fortune Education email list, you'll get an email from me a couple of days before to announce the topic. But otherwise, like my page and you'll get the notification when I next go live. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Take care. See you soon.